Sparta, 700 years before Christ. Beneath the shadow of Mount Taygetus, a mother stands barefoot in silence, holding a child she cannot name. Around her, the mountain wind whistles through stone, carrying with it the screams of infants who were not chosen. 5 elders wait beside the gorge, draped in crimson, eyes hollow with duty. The state has summoned her not to celebrate life, but to measure it. In this city of warriors, a child's worth is decided before its first word. Perfection is not praised here. It is demanded. Anything less is thrown away. She had carried him for 9 moons, feeling every twist and flutter as sacred. But now, as her feet touched the cold stone, that life was no longer hers. The inspection site was nothing more than a flat plateau near the edge of the apathetic gorge, but to every Spartan mother, it was a place of judgment. Thaleia was 17, the daughter of a full Spartan line, and this was her first child. She had not named him. No mother did before inspection. To name an infant was to assume survival, and in Sparta, assumptions were dangerous. 2 warriors had escorted her from the city at first light. No words were exchanged. No comfort was offered. Ahead of her stood the Gerousia 5 elders with faces like weathered marble, each one a survivor of 30 years of battle. They were not midwives or physicians. They were executioners cloaked in law. One stepped forward, arms out. Thaleia's hands trembled as she passed her son to him. The baby whimpered. That sound alone could save or doom him. The first elder held the infant by the ankles, raising him upside down to test the spine. Another spread the tiny arms and pressed on the ribs. A third opened the mouth and peered inside. Each movement was exact, mechanical. Thaleia stared at their hands, at the creases in their skin, wondering how many children those fingers had condemned. Her body ached to cry out, to snatch him back, but silence was law. A mother who protested risked disqualifying the child through dishonor. Her nails dug into her palms. Blood dripped to the stone. The baby wailed, now high and sharp, his small limbs flailing. The wind answered him, curling around the mountain's edge as if to carry the sound down into the gorge. The final elder, Lysandros, stepped forward. He was nearly 70, tall and hunched, his eyes the pale gray of mountain fog. He studied the infant's face for a long moment. His lips did not move, but his hand did raised once, palm turned inward. A signal, not death, not yet. A murmur passed between the elders. One turned and handed the child back to Thaleia. He was warm, alive, approved, but she felt no joy, only the trembling in her bones, the weakness in her knees. Her son would live, yes, but not for her, not truly. In 7 years, the state would claim him again. Today was not a rescue, it was a postponement. And behind her, another mother stepped forward. Agathe did not meet her husband until the night he came to take her. That was the custom. There were no rings, no oaths, no garlands of olive. Just 2 warriors at her door and the soft cry of her mother, who turned her face away as Agathe was carried from the home. Her head was shaved, her body wrapped in a man's cloak and sandals. She was no longer a maiden, she was no longer herself. She was breeding stock now. In Sparta, marriage was not about love. It was a duty, a function, a pairing of 2 bodies deemed strong enough to produce children the state might approve. Agathe was 15, chosen by the ephors for her shoulders, her posture, her clean family line. Her husband, Menon, was 27, a seasoned hoplite whose eyes had seen the Helots burn. They spoke only once before the coupling. It was not violent, but it was cold, quick, functional, a soldier performing his orders. When he left the room, Agathe stared at the wall until dawn, her fingers pressed to the spot on the floor where her body had been used. It was not just Menon who would decide whether she bore children. The state had a voice in that too, and so did others. In Sparta, if a man was old but his wife young, he was encouraged to find a more vigorous partner for her, someone who could better fulfill the Republic's need for strong sons. And if a younger man admired another's wife, he could request her body in the name of civic duty. Agathe was asked, not by Menon, but by the elder who came 2 seasons later, a friend of her husband, strong, clean-blooded. The request was polite, even formal, but refusal was not an option. She submitted because it was expected, because the state had already taught her that her body was never hers. Months passed. Then came the swell of her belly, the weight of something not her own growing within her ribs. Women offered advice in the bathhouse. Eat figs soaked in wine, rub oil on your thighs, stare at strong statues so the baby will be beautiful. Pray to Artemis, but never touch the altar. Every gesture was a calculation, every movement a prayer not for life, but for acceptability. When she walked through the agora, eyes followed her not with desire, but with scrutiny. Would this one bring forth a warrior? Would this womb be worthy? When the child came, it came screaming. A boy, 10 fingers, 2 eyes, straight legs. But Agathe did not name him. She only looked into his face and wondered what the elders would see. Because even if she bore him, nursed him, wept for him, he belonged to Sparta now. And Sparta had never wept for anyone. They came for him before the sun rose. No knock, no ceremony, just the rustle of sandals against stone and the silent presence of 2 state-appointed attendants, cloaked in crimson and authority. Thaleia had been expecting them. Every Spartan mother did. The moment her son drew his first breath, the clock had started counting down to this day, 7 years. That was all the time she was given to love him quietly, carefully, never too much. Now it was over. She handed him over with steady arms but hollow eyes. His name was Theron. It meant hunter. He did not cry when they took him. That, too, was a kind of preparation. From his first steps, Thaleia had trained him to be still, to eat in silence, to bear pain without complaint. Spartan mothers did not cradle their children. They hardened them. To do less was betrayal. The agoge was not a school. It was a forge. There, boys were stripped of identity, of softness, of anything that did not serve the phalanx. Theron was her son, but to the agoge, he was raw material. His head was shaved, his tunic exchanged for coarse wool. He was placed in an agala, a herd of boys his age, 60 in number. They slept on straw, shoulder to shoulder, in rooms colder than the mountain wind. Food was scarce by design. Hunger taught resourcefulness. Theft was encouraged, but only if you were clever enough not to be caught. Punishment was not for the crime, but for incompetence. Violence was daily, expected. Older boys beat the younger. Instructors watched without blinking. Bones broke, teeth cracked. No one intervened. Compassion was weakness. Pity was disease. At night, the youngest boys whispered stories of home, of mothers, of warmth, of names they were no longer allowed to speak aloud. Theron did not join them. He stared at the ceiling and counted the cracks. He had learned from Thaleia how to survive the silence. One winter, the trial began. The cryptia. It was no lesson. It was murder. At night, cloaked and barefoot, Theron and the others were sent into the countryside. Their task was to kill a helote. Any helote. No reason required. No guilt permitted. It was a rite of passage, a lesson that death could be ordinary, that the enemy need not threaten to deserve execution. Theron found his target on a road lined with olive trees, a man bent with age, carrying firewood. Theron used a dagger and did not ask the man's name. He buried the weapon after, not out of shame, but to remove the evidence. That night, he did not sleep, but he did not weep either. By spring, only 47 boys remained in his agala. The rest had died in accidents or failed to endure. Theron endured. That was enough. In Sparta, survival was the only proof of worth. The rest, pain, blood, grief, was just noise. She was born on a day of rain, though Sparta rarely wept from the sky. The midwife whispered that it was a sign cleansing, sacred. But as the droplets struck the roof and the infant let out her first cry, her mother, Callianera, said nothing. A daughter in Sparta was not a blessing. She was a vessel. A girl was allowed to live not because she was wanted, but because the state needed mothers, strong mothers, fast, silent, unyielding. From the beginning, Damaris was watched for her form, not her words, not her thoughts, her limbs, her chest, her stride. She learned to run before she learned to pray. At 5, she could throw a javelin farther than boys her age. At 7, she outran most of them. Men watched her at the gymnasium, not with lust, but with calculation. Her shoulders, her thighs, the arch of her foot. Could she carry children? Could she survive birth? Could she survive 10? She trained in linen cloth so sheer it was barely there, oiled skin glistening beneath the summer sun. Her instructors shouted not praise, but commands. Higher, faster, again, always again. There were no dolls, no songs, no softness. Damaris did not learn to sew. She learned to breathe through pain, to smile through exhaustion. Her reward was silence and a bowl of barley. That was the way. At 13, she was told she would be married. The man chosen for her was 23, a warrior named Alkamos who had never spoken to her, never asked her name. He was strong, he was lean, he had survived the agoge with every tooth and every finger intact. That was enough. The wedding was not a ceremony, it was a disappearance. Damaris was abducted by Alkamos and his comrades, though everyone had been warned and everyone had agreed. Her head was shaved, her clothes replaced with a man's cloak. They lay together in darkness, without words. She bled on the mat and bled again 3 days later when her body resisted the ritual. But by winter, she was with child. She continued training, lifting stones and running hills with her belly growing tighter. Midwives watched her diet, her posture, the color of her tongue. One whispered that if her breath was too shallow, the baby might emerge weak. Another warned her not to cry in labor. If she screamed, the gods might hear a curse instead of a birth. Damaris obeyed them all. When her daughter was born, the child had a red mark on her left shoulder. Nothing painful, nothing broken, just a patch of skin shaped like a leaf. Damaris wept only once, when the elder paused, stared too long, and whispered to another. She did not hear the verdict. She did not need to. Her arms were already empty. Her daughter's name had never been spoken aloud, and now it never would be. The numbers began to shrink, but the laws did not. Sparta, once the terror of the Peloponnese, was starving not from grain or gold, but from bodies. Too many boys had died in training. Too many girls had been discarded in infancy. The state needed warriors. The state needed wombs, but it refused to loosen its grip. Penthea stood in line with her infant son as the wind rose over Mount Taygetus. She had climbed the path alone, her husband lost to a skirmish near Argos, her feet raw from the rocks. Her son was alive, breathing, but a faint birthmark darkened the skin above his collarbone. It was no sickness, no deformity, just a shadow, shaped like a crescent. She had scrubbed it for 3 days, hoping it would fade. It did not. The elders did not speak as they passed the infant from one to the next. Their eyes did not flinch, but their silence lengthened. The eldest among them, a man called Theocles, had served through 6 inspections each season for 30 years. He had seen limbs twisted, eyes clouded, lungs fail in minutes. This child had none of that. He had strength in his neck. He had fingers that gripped. He had lungs that cried without ceasing. But he had a mark. That was all. Theocles did not raise his hand. He looked at the mother. Penthea stared back. Her eyes did not plead. Her mouth did not open. She knew the rule. To speak was to shame. But in her silence, something deeper stirred. She had borne this child in a time when Sparta was hollowing from the inside. The helots bred faster than citizens. The barracks emptied faster than they filled. Even the ephors whispered of shortage behind marble doors. And yet the law stood unchanged, perfection or nothing, life or the gorge. The word was spoken, rejected. A warrior took her son. She did not move. She did not scream. But her body leaned forward as if it could undo the moment. As if weight alone could anchor the child back into her arms. It did not. She returned down the mountain alone, her arms trembling from the absence. Behind her, another mother climbed, clutching her own uncertain future. In the years that followed, the numbers fell further. The state tried to force more marriages. Women were bred younger. Men pushed to couple sooner. Even hallowed women were watched with interest by certain officials. A thought once unthinkable. But the inspections continued. The laws refused to bend. And Sparta, so proud in its discipline, could not see it was disciplining itself to death. Penthea never conceived again, Some said it was grief that closed her womb. Others said the gods were turning their backs. But in the quiet alleys of the city, women began to whisper that the gorge was no longer sacred. It was a graveyard for Sparta's own future. The stones remember, even when the city forgets, even when the children's names were never spoken aloud, never carved into marble, never sung in funerals. The wind still passes through the crevice of the Apothete Gorge, where thousands of infants were cast down not for crimes, not for illness, but for imperfection. There are no monuments there, no temple, no altar, only the quiet echo of a choice repeated across centuries. In the modern hills near ancient Sparta, bones are still being found, small bones, infant bones, pale and hollowed by time. Archaeologists dig slowly, with brushes and patience, finding tiny ribs beside smooth stones, some wrapped in fragments of linen that never reached decay. These remains are not myths, they are records. Proof that what the elders called purification was execution, that what the laws named strength was selection, and that the Spartans who so feared defeat defeated themselves from within. They bred for perfection and destroyed their numbers. They demanded strength and culled their future. The breeding program that sustained Sparta's army also strangled its population. The system left no room for mercy, no allowance for grief. A child with 6 fingers, a birthmark too dark, a cry that came too late, all were enough. The laws written under the name of Lycurgus became chains, not just for children, but for mothers, for fathers, for the city itself. They could not admit the law was flawed, because to question the law was to unravel their identity. So they clung to it, even as the bodies stacked higher in the gorge and the warriors marched fewer on the field. Gorgo, whose daughter had been thrown for a hand with 1 extra digit, lived to see the inspections continue even as Sparta decayed. She bore more children, watched more mothers descend the mountain with arms emptied by verdicts. She trained her body, bore her pain, did her duty, but something inside her had turned to stone. Like the gorge itself, unmoving, unspoken. When Sparta fell slowly, not with fire but with silence, it was not because of war. It was because there were no longer enough hands to lift the shield, no longer enough wombs untouched by grief. Other cities, Athens, Thebes, even Corinth, adapted. They allowed their people to survive with flaws. Sparta did not, and so it passed into memory. A name carved into the histories of generals and battles, while the gorge remained unmarked. But it is there. The stones still shift when the mountain winds howl. Wildflowers grow at the edge each spring, as if trying to cover what cannot be undone. And beneath them, the bones sleep fragile, weightless, and forgotten by the state that cast them away. Their voices are gone, but their silence is loud.